Another Pokemon Sleep update and some game rebalances are coming. And if you started the game exactly 20 weeks ago, unfortunately, you're gonna feel a little bit ripped off. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video. It's Bro Vinny here. Today we're covering the version 1.7.2 update that is coming on the 14th of May or the 13th depending on where you live. In this update, they're gonna drop some Entei event material, which you won't be able to access, but the data miners can. So we'll be waiting for the data miners to see what type of info we can get for the Entei research. But also, some nice mechanic changes in the game. Anybody now can use the Sleep EXP bonus gauge. And if you haven't seen it before, this is what it looks like, where if you reach the level cap, all your excess EXP will go into filling this gauge, and this gauge is about 500 EXP worth, and if you manage to fill the entire bar, you get one Handy Candy S, which is equivalent to 3 candies. But the catch of using this feature, accessing this feature, is that it was mainly initially intended for maybe whales or early game adopters who can reach the final current level cap. And I don't mean the level cap related to your research rank, I mean the final current level cap, which right now is 55. It used to be 50. So anybody who reached level 55 on any of their Pokemon will be able to access this gauge. But if you reach a level cap that's a bit earlier because your research rank isn't high enough. So what I mean by that is if you're brand new to the game and you're only research rank 1 to 4, your maximum Pokemon level can only be level 15. So if you manage to get a lot of resources and materials to power up your Pokemon to level 15, well, any excess EXP is completely lost. But things are about to change, because if that happens to you, from now on, it will no longer be lost, because any excess EXP from this update onwards, including that of lower research ranks, will also go into the Sleep EXP bonus gauge. And it kind of makes sense why they would introduce this now. Yes, they really should have introduced this a long time ago. But I think the main reason why they have to introduce this now is because as the level cap goes up, it becomes more and more impossible for anybody who are just starting out the game to access the Sleep EXP bonus gauge. And as you should know, for any game to maintain its player base, you gotta be able to draw in new players every so often. So to design features that are beneficial to new players is almost always a good idea. Furthermore, new players are getting some even nicer benefits. If you're a new player and you have the Novice Researcher bonus active. So what I mean by that, and I'm going to reference a really old video that I made because this feature is only active when you're brand new to the game, you get this little banner down here that says Novice Researcher bonus. And there's a number of things, I don't quite remember everything that's in that bonus. I think there's some extra sleep points, but on top of that, if you have this banner from now on your first 7 sleep sessions, one Pokemon will be guaranteed to be hungry, and that's a really nice bonus to try and get new players to come join the game. And as usual, it only applies to the first session of the day, not the second. And the other feature you'll get is that instead of adding 5% to your area bonus, new players will get 10% to their area bonus until you achieve 100% total area bonus across all of your islands. That means if you started the game about 20 weeks ago and you've been getting 5% area bonus for the last 20 weeks, now adding up to a total of 100% area bonus, well, this bonus doesn't apply to you. And I think that's a great buff for new players to try and catch up to the long-term players. For this second feature, you don't actually need the Novice Researcher bonus in order for it to be active. There is an exception to the 20 weeks, is that if you actually hit the area bonus cap for any of the islands, well, maybe your total area bonus isn't actually 100% even after 20 weeks. Because you haven't actually been getting some increases in your area bonus. And I refer you to this chart here to show you what your area bonus cap would be depending on what Sleep Styles Dex goal you've reached. So if you're brand new to the game, the area bonus will be 10 at maximum, but most people would have found more than 7 sleep styles even within the first week. So I don't expect anyone to actually be at that 10% area bonus. Now, before we get into the game rebalances again, let's talk about this last point over here. There is a slight improvement in how Pokemon Go++ is going to be tracking your sleep sessions. It used to be that when you connect your Pokemon Go++, it doesn't matter how many sessions you've stored in there, it will only let you research the last session. Any sessions before that are automatically reviewed. And I know this because I made a whole video about the problem I had when I accidentally pressed the button on the PokeGo++ at night. And I actually realized this in the middle of the night and I immediately started tracking again in hopes that the 2 sessions are close enough together that the game would actually just join them together. Unfortunately, that was not the case. And I only got to research 1 session and the other session was automatically reviewed. But that's about to change with this update. If that ever happened to you, that you rolled over the Pokemon Go++ button in the middle of the night, immediately start tracking again because you will be able to do proper sleep research on both sessions without the game automatically doing your sleep research for you. In fact, I've even seen some people lose shinies because of it. When the game automatically does a sleep session for you, you can actually encounter shinies and it will let you know that you did encounter a shiny, but you just never got to catch it. So I think that's a great quality of life improvement for Pokemon Go++ players. Although there is one catch. If you decide to start tracking immediately after accidentally ending tracking, just be aware that you're not past the 4 AM mark because then all you're doing is starting another session but for the next day instead. Now for the last part of this video, we're going to look at the game rebalances. Once again, the Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon like Persian and Lucario are getting buffs. And this continues to support the fact that, well, nobody really likes them and likes to use them. I know people like Lucario, that is a fan favorite. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm just talking about the skill itself is contradictory. Now, I haven't done a full video on this, but every time somebody tells me they want to use a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon, I go, well, you realize that you're losing Drowsy Power by using it, and therefore you're actually losing Dream Shard from your sleep research sessions, and it's cumulative because the Drowsy Power racks up throughout the week. Whereas if you use Lucario or Persian or Swalot, and we now know Swalot is amongst the best in that skill, well, you'd hope that not only do you get Dream Shards from the skill triggers, you'd hope that the Dream Shards from those skill triggers actually compensates you enough for the losses because of a reduced Drowsy Power. Because you were running one of these Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon instead of a Berry Specialist or an Ingredient Specialist in order to cook the right dishes, and therefore harming your Drowsy Power. Not to mention the other roll-on effects of a reduced Drowsy Power like less candies, less spawns, less chance for shiny, and shiny means that you have to spend less biscuits. It's actually quite hard to quantify the value of all of those losses to compare with running a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon to see if it's actually worth it, which is why I still haven't done a video about that. So I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying you need to consider your losses whenever you do run a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon like Lucario. And one more thing is the main skill seed investment to make any skill Pokemon good, like Lucario and its Dream Shard Magnet, is huge. You would need 4 or 5 main seeds in order to make Lucario its max skill level in order to maximize the Dream Shard gains to offset the reduced Drowsy Power. And those skill seed investments are a huge opportunity cost in the long run. Alright, let's take a look at the actual buff itself. What does it mean when Lucario's frequency is reduced by 100 seconds and Persian's frequency is reduced by 200 seconds? Now, this was actually a very simple maths problem. All we have to do is look at what percentage Lucario's speed has increased by, or frequency has reduced by. So let's take a look at Lucario's base frequency, or also known as helping time. Now I do want to mention that the word frequency is a misnomer in this game, and in other languages, the frequency is actually called helping time, because the number that's listed is a time, whereas frequency is the inverse of time. So Lucario's base frequency is 45 minutes, or time is 45 minutes, so that's 2,700 seconds. So if we take away 100 seconds, how much is that relative to the 2,700 helping time? And that's about a 3.7% speed increase, which works out to be about half of a helping speed S. In other words, not a huge amount. So what I'm expecting this list to look like after the update is that after the buff for Lucario, that 3.5% speed boost should put it above Sableye in terms of expected skill count in a day. Of course, ultimately it also depends on how you set up your calculator, but based on my regular settings of about 8.5 hours of sleep, I'm using always max energy for comparison, but it's almost like the developers were watching my videos, because if you saw my video about variable versus fixed outcomes, you'll remember that Pokemon with the variable outcome being stronger than those with the fixed outcome. And we did a data analysis of Pokemon with Charge Strength S to prove that point. We never actually did it for Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon because there's just not enough data to get any result, but we can extrapolate from that. Now if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm referring to that some Dream Shard Magnets Pokemon have variable outcomes on their skills. So for example, Sableye can drop 120 to 480 Dream Shards at level 1. Whereas Lucario or Persian, both of the Pokemon that are getting buffed, are both fixed outcome Dream Shard Magnets, which will guarantee to drop 240 at level 1 main skill, which is on average less than that of the variable outcome. So I guess the funny thing is, even if Lucario overtakes Sableye in skill counts in a day, Sableye's skill is still better than that of Lucario because of the overall bigger amounts of drop. Swalot is actually the best out of all of these Pokemon, with the most Dream Shard drops on average and the highest skill trigger rate in a day. Now I won't go through the maths for Persian, but you can do the same thing to see what kind of numbers Persian will get by the end of the buff. But since Persian was so low in the ranking before, adding 200 seconds doesn't actually improve it by that much. And Persian is also a fixed outcome Dream Shard Magnet S, which is on average worse than that of the variable outcome like Swalot. And despite the buff to Pokemon with the Energizing Cheer skill, still not many people run that skill unless it's on a Pokemon they already need, like Ninetales for example. Wobbuffet got buffed for its skill trigger as well as carry limit, which is also beneficial for skill triggers. Now I'm not going to do a deep dive on Wobbuffet, I just don't think anyone's going to use it anyway, because the skill itself is still pales in comparison to energy for everyone for various reasons, not just by skill trigger rate, but also because energy for everyone heals the entire team to a total of a bigger amount than this skill, and this skill has a risk of wastage if the energy goes over 150%. But let's take a look at the list, the current ranking for Energizing Cheer Pokemon. Slowking being 3.6 triggers in a day using my settings is well over the 10% buff that Wobbuffet is going to get. There is no question that Slowking is still king for this skill. So I don't really understand this microscopic change for Wobbuffet. But if anyone has any ideas of why they buff Wobbuffet by a tiny amount, you let me know in the comments section below. Maybe you can find use for it at Lakeside, but I feel like there's huge competition with Gardevoir for the same favorite berries anyway. So now that brings us to the most interesting buff from this update. I'm not saying this is a great buff, I'm just saying this is the most interesting one out of the 4 buffs that we're getting, and that is for Golduck. Golduck is getting an ingredient buff. Now you might go, that's a bit strange. It's a skill specialist. What's it doing with ingredients? And I'll cover that in a moment. But carry limit +3 will give a general buff to both the skill triggers from Golduck and also to that of ingredient productions. Now it actually makes almost no sense to increase carry limit for a Golduck. Let me explain why, and we're covering a topic we've already covered before, and we're talking about Charge Strength S versus Charge Strength M skill specialist. Most people prefer Ampharos as the main skill specialist for Charge Strength if they're gonna focus on one. And that's because Charge Strength M doesn't have to trigger a lot of times in a day, but when it does, it drops more Charge Strength than Charge Strength S. But Charge Strength S actually overall is better than Charge Strength M if you were theoretically able to collect every production on Golduck. What that means is you're going to be tapping on Golduck all day for it to be worth it. Or at least swap him out of the team when you're not actually able to play the game. So for example, when you're going to sleep. So have a look at what I mean over here. What I've done is I've set the setting in the calculator to not sleeping, but I will keep everyone at max energy by having 100 triggers of energy for everyone in a day. I'm currently in production comparison in the Rainix calculator. So why is it that Golduck has a greater strength production than that of Ampharos, yet nobody wants to use Golduck? And that's because Golduck triggers a lot of times in a day. Now this is being very conservative. Let's set Golduck. I'm currently at level 1. Now let's give Golduck some very nice stats like helping bonus, helping speed M, skill trigger M, and also a skill up nature. And also apply the same to that of Ampharos. So skill trigger, helping speed, and helping bonus. And then main skill chance up as well. Now between the two Pokemon, still Golduck is better. But Golduck triggers 16 times in a day. That means that if you collect every time Golduck produces a berry or an ingredient, and you are able to collect every possible skill trigger, you could do better than running an Ampharos. Of course, when you do go to sleep though, you have to swap out the Golduck because you can't collect Golduck's productions unless you do use a Pokego++, but that's another story. If you don't collect 16 on average skill triggers in a day, you're not going to beat Ampharos. And I personally would prefer a lower skill trigger rate, but for the trigger to be a strong production. As long as it's not too different to that of the other version, where it is a weaker production, but a lot of triggers. Because I just don't think it's realistic to be logging into the game every 10-15 minutes. Which brings us back to why the heck do we need carry limit on Golduck? So the reason why carry limit normally buffs skill for a skill specialist or any specialist is that if you reach the carry limit, a skill can no longer trigger if it hasn't already. It cannot be banked. So once you've hit sneaky snacking and the skill hadn't been banked yet, you're just not going to get a skill to trigger. Now under normal circumstances, besides Golduck, that's not a bad thing because you get 3 extra slots of the inventory for a skill to have a chance to trigger. But for Golduck, if you're waiting that long and you haven't been collecting its skill trigger for the last several hours, then you're not using Golduck properly. Go use something else. Now, of course, some people might have a berry finding S Golduck or might have some other nice features on it. So I'm not talking about all the other features. So there are specific situations where Golduck is still going to be nice. I'm just talking about in a general sense, you really shouldn't be using Golduck. If you do decide to use Golduck, use it during a period where you can play the game frequently, or maybe even set up an auto tapper or something like that. For Android, you can use some apps that can do auto tapping. Just make sure that the app isn't being detected by the game. But I'm not aware of any bans that happen because of detecting an auto tapper, but it could happen in the future. Now for iOS, there's almost no apps out there that's good for auto tapping. Even the iOS native auto tapper, it completely sucks. It won't work for how you want it to work. So if you're on an iOS, I suggest that you get a physical auto tapper, something that looks like this or something that looks like this. Again, I can't show you guys or explain what these are in case the developers get mad at me. I'm not saying I use it personally, I just have them for other games. Now, back to the main point about this buff on Golduck. So the main buff here is actually ingredient finding. Carry limit is completely senseless, useless. You shouldn't be using Golduck if you actually needed that carry limit, but there probably is a reason why they added the carry limit, and it's because that Golduck drops a lot more apples for being a non-ingredient specialist. So having ingredient finding now 20% better than it used to be, it may cause the inventory limit to be reached earlier. Not that it matters because you should be collecting Golduck every 15 to 20 minutes anyway. So let's take a look and compare a neutral level 30 Golduck and a neutral level 30 Raichu. The reason why I've chosen these two Pokemon is because they're both non-ingredient specialists. Raichu actually drops less apples than that of Golduck per production, but Raichu is a lot faster, and actually Raichu has a higher ingredient rate, 22%. Now that's not a good thing for a berry specialist. It wouldn't be too bad on a skill specialist, but that's generally not a good thing on a berry specialist to have a high ingredient rate. But for the purposes of this argument, we're going to focus on the ingredient rate as though it were a good thing. Let's say you're short on apples for a certain dish and you really need apples. Which Pokemon should you run? Since there's no pure apple ingredient specialist in this game. So unless you got Apple on your Delibird, who should be doing eggs instead, or you got Apple on your Absol, who should be doing cacao instead, or you got Apple on your Pinsir, but Pinsir is so hard to find, expensive to invest, lack of candy, so it's still not an ideal situation. It was always theorized that maybe Golduck could be used to farm apples. The problem with Golduck though is that its low ingredient rate means that it actually drops a small amount of apples despite a bigger amount each. And here you can see that Golduck drops 16 apples in 24 hours. When I say 24 hours, because the settings have set myself to only sleep for 1 minute, essentially not sleeping. And Raichu gets 31 apples in a day. Now, to be fair, Golduck also drops cacao. So what we should do, just to make this comparison fair, is we only want to look at the level 30 production. In other words, we want to remove about 30% of the apples from this drop here. So if we take the 31 apples from Raichu and times it by 66%, 2/3 essentially, it gets 20 apples in 24 hours, which actually is still more than Golduck's 16 apples for the level 30 drop. So the question now is, does Golduck's 20% buff make it better than Raichu, another non-ingredient specialist for farming apples? The reason why I keep using Raichu as an example is because everyone has access to Raichu from an early point. So 16.15 times 1.2 is 19.38. In fact, it just about matches that of Raichu in apple farming, but still isn't better. So given there's so many problems of running Golduck in order for it to be even good for its skill, and on top of that, actually still not getting as many apples as a level 30 apple Raichu. Of course, for some people, you might have Ginger instead, so you might not have a lot of choices. You might have to use a Golduck. So the conclusion is, well, Golduck's 1.2 times the ingredient rate actually isn't that big a deal. If you have level 30 apple and Raichu, just use that as your apple farmer until you can find a good ingredient specialist that can do apples. And I can't believe I've talked that long about such a small update, so thank you for watching, guys. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with people who are still learning the game.